Keanu Reeves liked to travel like a regular person. He didn't want special treatment like other famous people. He stood in lines, carried his own bags, and didn't make a big deal about anything. Even though he was a big star, he just wanted to move through life quietly. Today, he was flying from Los Angeles to Tokyo to start filming a new movie. It was a long flight, and his assistant booked him a first-class ticket so he could rest. Keanu didn't mind flying in economy class because he liked sitting with other passengers and talking to them. But this time, he agreed to take the comfortable seat. When Keanu reached the first-class check-in counter, the airport was busy. People hurried to their gates, announcements played over the speakers, and some fans whispered when they recognized him. He smiled at a few people and kept walking. All he wanted was to get on the plane, find his seat, and rest. But something unexpected happened. At the check-in desk, a woman named Emma was working. She wore a neat uniform, had blonde hair in a tight bun, and looked very serious. Without even looking at him properly, she held up her hand and stopped him. "First-class passengers only," she said in a cold voice. Keanu, not upset, took out his boarding pass and handed it to her. "I am flying first class," he said. Emma looked at the ticket, then smirked. "This must be a mistake." Keanu frowned. "I don't think so. That's my seat." Emma shook her head. "I'm sorry, but we don't allow free upgrades or fake tickets in first class today. That section is for paying passengers only." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "I am a paying passenger." Emma laughed a little as if she didn't believe him. "Sir, with all due respect, I don't think so." Then she did something no one expected. She took his ticket and tore it in half. The sound of the paper ripping was loud, and nearby passengers turned to look, shocked. For a moment, everything was silent. Keanu stared at his torn ticket. His face didn't show anger, but inside he was surprised. A young employee at the counter turned pale. His eyes darted between Keanu and Emma, looking scared. "Emma," the young worker whispered, "I think you just made a big mistake." But Emma didn't care. She crossed her arms and said, "If you want to fly, you'll have to buy a real ticket like everyone else." Keanu let out a quiet chuckle. Not because he thought it was funny, but because he couldn't believe what was happening. He never liked to use his fame to get special treatment, but this was crazy. More people gathered around. Some started filming, others whispered in shock. A businessman nearby muttered, "Did she just rip up Keanu Reeves' ticket?" A woman holding her phone asked, "Is this really happening?" Even the airline staff noticed something was wrong. A senior flight attendant rushed over. "What's going on here?" she asked. Emma rolled her eyes. "This man was trying to sneak into first class with a fake ticket. I took care of it." The flight attendant's face changed completely. She turned to Keanu, her eyes wide. "Oh my gosh, Mr. Reeves, I am so sorry." Before Keanu could respond, another voice cut through the air. It was a voice that made Emma freeze. "Excuse me, but what did you just do to my guest?" Everyone turned to look. Walking toward them was a tall, elegant woman in a black suit. She looked powerful, like she owned the place. Because she did. It was Victoria Hayes, the CEO of the airline. The moment Emma saw her, her face turned pale. The people watching gasped when they realized who she was. Victoria's sharp eyes landed on Keanu. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice strong but kind. "Are you okay?" Keanu, always calm, gave a small smile. "I think my ticket had an unfortunate accident." Victoria looked at the torn pieces in Emma's hands, then back at her. Emma opened her mouth to explain but couldn't find any words. Victoria folded her arms. "I'd like to know why my personal guest was just denied boarding." The whole airport went silent. Emma's eyes widened. "Personal guest?" she whispered. Victoria sighed, trying to stay calm. "Yes. Mr. Reeves was flying on a first-class ticket personally gifted by me as a thank you for his kindness and charity work." She narrowed her eyes. "And you ripped it up?" Emma's mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. Keanu looked at Emma. He wasn't angry. He had been through a lot in life and knew that holding on to anger wasn't worth it. So instead of making things worse, he held out his hand and said, "It's okay. People make mistakes." Victoria, still upset, looked at him for a moment before nodding. "You're too kind, Mr. Reeves." Then she turned to Emma. "But we can't allow this kind of behavior in our company." Emma's body tensed. Victoria looked at the senior flight attendant. "Please take her off duty. We will discuss her job later." As Emma was led away, Keanu turned to Victoria and gave her a small smile. "Well, that was unexpected." Victoria sighed and then chuckled. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Reeves." She handed him a new first-class ticket. But this time it had no expiration date. The tension in the airport disappeared as Keanu walked toward the plane with Victoria. The crowd whispered about what had just happened. Keanu didn't act proud or smug. He just nodded in thanks and followed Victoria. "Thank you," he said, smiling softly. Victoria smiled back. "No, Mr. Reeves, thank you for handling that better than most people would." They walked in silence for a moment before Victoria added, "And please call me Victoria." Keanu nodded. "Only if you call me Keanu." She chuckled. "Deal." As they got on the plane, the flight attendants greeted them. They looked professional but also a little in awe. It wasn't every day that the airline's owner and a famous movie star boarded together. But no one knew that the flight was about to get even more interesting. Keanu took his window seat and stretched out. It was comfortable and luxurious, but he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The way Emma had judged him. The way Victoria had stepped in and changed everything in a second. Victoria sat beside him and noticed his expression. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" she asked. Keanu turned to her, a little amused. "That obvious?" She smiled. "It was unfair. But it happens more than you think." Keanu studied her. "I guess you've seen a lot of situations like this?" Victoria sighed. "More than I'd like to admit. Some people in power, even small power, think they can decide who belongs where." Keanu nodded. "And yet, you own the whole airline and still treat everyone with kindness." She shrugged. "Because everyone matters." Keanu admired her answer. Victoria wasn't just a boss. She truly cared about people. As the plane took off, Victoria added, "By the way, I knew who you were the moment you walked in. But that wasn't why I helped you." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Oh." She smirked. "I help because I don't tolerate arrogance. And because I love proving people wrong." Keanu chuckled. "That I can respect." The city lights of Los Angeles faded below them, and for the first time all day Keanu finally relaxed. Keanu nodded. He understood something many bosses didn't. A real leader stays close to the people. But before their talk could continue, a loud noise came from the front of the plane. Something was happening in business class. Keanu and Victoria stopped talking and turned to look. A flight attendant rushed past them, looking worried. From the corner of his eye, Keanu saw passengers shifting in their seats, looking uncomfortable. "What's going on?" Victoria asked as she unbuckled her seatbelt. Before the flight attendant could answer, a loud voice filled the cabin. "I demand an explanation. I paid for this flight and I won't be treated this way." Keanu knew that voice. "Madeline." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." Curious, Keanu stood up with her and they walked toward the noise. And there she was, Madeline, the same airline worker who had ripped up Keanu's ticket. But now she was arguing with another flight attendant. Keanu and Victoria exchanged looks. "I thought she was kicked out," Keanu whispered. "So did I," Victoria said, frowning. The flight attendant talking to Madeline looked tired and frustrated. "Ma'am, I understand that you're upset, but you have been moved to business class." Madeline scoffed. "Moved? I was supposed to be at the airport working in first class. Why am I sitting here like a passenger?" Keanu's eyes widened as he realized the truth. Madeline hadn't been fired. She had been put on the flight as a regular passenger. Victoria crossed her arms. Her voice was cold. "Because I put you here." Madeline spun around, her face turning pale. "Emmett Hayes?" Victoria held up her hand. "Save it. You wanted to be in first class so badly that you disrespected one of my guests. Now you get to be a passenger. And guess what? Passengers don't make the rules." Madeline opened her mouth to argue, but for the first time she had nothing to say. It was almost funny. She had torn up Keanu's ticket, thinking he didn't belong in first class. But now she was sitting on the same flight, unable to control anything. Keanu was still trying to believe what he was seeing. He shook his head and finally said, "Well, this is unexpected." Victoria smirked. "You have no idea." For the rest of the flight, Madeline sat quietly in business class. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. The proud, bossy attitude she had before was gone. She looked small now, embarrassed. Keanu sat back in his first-class seat. Victoria gave him a knowing glance. "Do you believe in karma, Keanu?" Keanu chuckled and swirled his wine glass. "After today? I just might." The soft hum of the airplane filled the first-class cabin. Everything had calmed down. Keanu Reeves sat comfortably in his big seat. He looked across the aisle at Victoria Hayes, the CEO of the airline. She had just shown everyone what justice looked like. A few rows away, Madeline sat stiffly, still shocked. She wasn't acting bossy anymore. At the airport, she had been so sure of herself, treating people like she was more important. But now she was just another passenger. Keanu didn't enjoy seeing people suffer. If anything, he felt a little bad for her. He had been judged before too. People thought they knew him because he was famous, but deep down he was just a normal guy trying to get from one place to another. Victoria, though, was still upset. She had seen too many employees act like Madeline, using their tiny bit of power to be rude to customers, thinking no one would notice. But today someone noticed, and justice had come quickly. A few minutes later, as flight attendants walked around serving drinks, Keanu leaned toward Victoria. He spoke softly so only she could hear. "You know," he said, sipping his water, "I don't think I've ever seen karma work that fast." Victoria sighed and rubbed her temple. "I didn't plan it that way. But I couldn't let that kind of behavior slide. I built this airline with respect and she completely threw that away." Keanu tilted his head. "I take it this isn't the first time you've had to deal with something like this?" Victoria chuckled and shook her head. "Oh, Keanu, you have no idea." She took a sip of her drink before continuing. "You wouldn't believe the kind of people I've met in this industry. Some people get so caught up in status that they forget how to treat others. I've seen rich business people try to bully their way into upgrades, famous people throw tantrums when they don't get their favorite seat, and even pilots act like they can do anything just because they wear a uniform." Keanu listened closely. He had been in Hollywood long enough to know arrogance wasn't just in movies, it was everywhere. Some people thought their job, money, or fame made them better than others. But Victoria? She was different. She didn't act important. She acted with purpose. She wasn't just the owner of the airline. She was a leader. Keanu leaned back, studying her. "You don't seem like the type to sit in an office all day," he said. "I bet you like being out here, seeing how things really work." Victoria smirked. "Very smart. I do work in the office, but I also take at least one flight a month as a normal passenger. Keeps me connected. It reminds me why I started this airline." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "And why did you?" She sighed, looking out the window at the clouds. "Because I know what it feels like to be ignored." Keanu waited, sensing there was more to the story. "I grew up in a poor family," she said. "We didn't fly much. Only when we had to. But every time we did, I noticed something. The flight attendants treated people differently based on how they looked. My mother worked 3 jobs just to afford our tickets, but she was treated like she didn't belong. People assumed we were in the wrong place just because we didn't look rich enough for business class." She turned to Keanu, her eyes full of fire. "That stuck with me. And when I got older, I told myself, if I ever had the power to change things, I would." Keanu felt deep respect for her. He had met many powerful people, but not many who truly understood what power was for. Victoria did. She was using hers to make a difference. Keanu glanced toward Madeline. She was staring at the seat in front of her, looking more and more uncomfortable. She wasn't evil. She was just stuck in the wrong mindset. She thought status mattered more than kindness. Maybe no one had ever taught her differently. Victoria followed Keanu's gaze. "You're thinking about talking to her, aren't you?" Keanu smiled. "What gave it away?" She sighed, shaking her head. "You really don't like seeing people suffer, do you?" "It's not that," Keanu said thoughtfully. "I just think moments like this can change people. But only if someone gives them a chance." Victoria looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, Keanu. Let's see what you can do." Keanu walked to where Madeline sat. She looked tense. He sat down next to her, letting the silence stretch before speaking. "Rough day, huh?" Madeline swallowed hard. "You could say that." Keanu leaned back. "You know, I've met a lot of people. Some good, some bad. But I've learned that most people don't mean to be bad. They just don't always see the impact of their actions." Madeline finally looked at him. "I thought you'd want me fired." Keanu chuckled. "That's not my style." She sighed, shoulders slumping. "I was just trying to do my job." "I get that," Keanu said. "But part of any job is knowing when to stop and think. Maybe I don't know everything." Madeline hesitated. "Do you think I deserve to be here?" Keanu tilted his head. "Do you?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, thinking for the first time. Keanu stood up. "Look, I don't hold grudges. And I don't think Victoria does either. The real question is, what will you do next?" Madeline looked down. "I don't know. But I think I have a lot to learn." Keanu nodded and gave her a small smile. "That's a good start," he said. The flight had started one way but was ending differently. As Keanu went back to his seat, Victoria was watching him with a smile. "You are really something special, Keanu," she said with a smirk. He laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. She raised her glass. To second chances, she said. Keanu clinked his glass against hers. To learn from our mistakes. As the plane kept flying, the world felt a little bit lighter. The feeling of forgiveness and change was in the air. The flight was now quiet. The big problem from earlier had passed, and now everything felt calm. People were thinking about what had happened. Keanu sat in his first-class seat, thinking about his talk with Emma. He remembered the way she looked at him, her eyes full of guilt and understanding. It made him believe she had learned from her mistake. People can change, he thought, but only if someone gives them a chance. Across from him, Victoria Hayes, the CEO of the airline, watched him with interest. She leaned back in her seat, touching the rim of her wine glass with her fingers. Then she spoke. You have a way of making people rethink their whole life, Keanu. Keanu chuckled. I wouldn't go that far. She raised an eyebrow. No? You turned that woman's worst moment into something she could learn from. Most people would have just wanted her fired. Keanu shrugged. I don't believe in burning bridges. Sometimes people just need a little help. Victoria looked at him for a moment, then nodded. That's rare. Keanu smirked. So I've been told. They kept talking about all kinds of things, scary travel stories, their favorite places to visit. Even though they lived very different lives, they both understood something important. Kindness matters. But then the plane speakers made a loud sound. A voice came through. Attention everyone. We have a small emergency on board. If there are any doctors or nurses on this flight, please come forward. Keanu and Victoria looked at each other. Something was wrong. Keanu unbuckled his seatbelt right away. Victoria did the same. They saw flight attendants hurrying toward business class. Their faces looked worried. Keanu and Victoria followed them. Other passengers were looking around, whispering, trying to see what was going on. Then Keanu saw it. A man was slumped in his seat. His face was pale. His breathing was slow. Beside him, his wife looked terrified. She held his arm tightly. Please, she begged. Someone help him. Keanu turned to Victoria. Is there a doctor on board? A flight attendant shook her head. We're checking, but no one has come forward yet. Victoria looked at Keanu. Do you know about first aid? Keanu nodded. I had some medical training for a movie role, but I'm not a doctor. Still, that was better than nothing. Keanu quickly knelt beside the man. He tried to remember what he had learned. He placed 2 fingers on the man's neck. His pulse was weak. Keanu looked up at the flight attendant. We need oxygen and a defibrillator. Just in case. The flight attendants rushed to get the equipment. Victoria knelt next to Keanu. She placed a gentle hand on the wife's shoulder. We're going to do everything we can, she said softly. The woman nodded, her eyes filled with tears. He has a heart condition, she said. But we didn't think. She stopped, shaking her head. Keanu leaned closer to the man. Sir, can you hear me? He gently shook the man's shoulder. The man's eyes fluttered, but he didn't respond. The flight attendant came back with the oxygen mask. Keanu carefully placed it over the man's nose and mouth. Just breathe, he said, watching closely. The cabin was silent. Everyone was waiting, hoping. Seconds felt like hours. Passengers whispered. Some prayed. Others held their breath. Then something changed. The man's breathing got a little stronger. His face, though still pale, was no longer gray. Keanu let out a deep breath. He looked at the flight attendant. Tell the pilot. If this gets worse, we might need an emergency landing. The crew quickly went to alert the pilot. The man, now a little more awake, looked up at Keanu. His eyes were tired and watery. You're Keanu Reeves, he said weakly. Keanu smiled a little. Yeah, but let's focus on you right now, okay? The man let out a small laugh. His voice was weak, but he was trying. Never thought I'd almost die and have John Wick save me, he joked. Keanu chuckled. Let's make sure you don't die at all, okay? The flight attendants adjusted the oxygen mask. Slowly, the man got a little stronger. A doctor had been contacted on the ground. The flight crew was preparing for a special landing. Victoria sat back and watched Keanu. She was amazed. When the plane landed, paramedics were waiting. They quickly took the man off the plane. The passengers sighed in relief. Some clapped softly. Others whispered about how incredible the flight had been. Keanu, tired but happy, leaned back in his seat. Victoria shook her head and smiled. All right, I take back what I said earlier. Keanu looked at her, raising an eyebrow. Oh, she grinned. You don't just make people rethink their lives. You actually save them. Keanu laughed. Right place, right time. But Victoria knew the truth. It wasn't luck. It wasn't just timing. Keanu was the kind of person who always showed up when people needed help. And that, she realized, was the difference between a famous person and a legend. As the passengers got off the plane, Emma stood near the exit. She looked different now. The proud, stubborn look on her face was gone. Instead, she looked grateful. She hesitated, then stepped forward. Keanu, She swallowed. Then she nodded. I just wanted to say thank you. Not just for earlier. For everything. Keanu looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled. You're welcome. And then, just like that, he walked off the plane. The people on that flight would never forget what had happened. The plane had landed safely. The sick man Daniel was okay. Inside the plane, people whispered about what they had just seen. Keanu Reeves is such a good person, they said. But for Keanu, it was never about being a hero. It was about doing the right thing. As he walked through the airport, he felt different. It had been a long, emotional day. He had gone from almost losing his flight to helping someone in need. Life was full of surprises. Victoria walked beside him. She was always elegant, always professional. But now she looked softer. You're a mystery, Keanu, she said, smiling. Most people in your place would have been angry. They would have demanded special treatment. But you let it go. Keanu smiled. Anger doesn't fix anything. People make mistakes. The real question is, do they learn from them? Victoria chuckled. You're rare, Keanu. He shrugged. I think kindness is more common than people think. It just doesn't always make the news. She nodded. Maybe. But today you reminded people what kindness really looks like. Keanu didn't say anything at first. He let her words settle in the space between them. Then, with a soft smile, he reached out his hand. Apology accepted, he said simply. Emma stared at his hand for a moment, almost like she didn't believe she deserved forgiveness. But then, after taking a deep breath, she reached out and shook his hand. I promise I'll do better, she said quietly. Keanu nodded. That's all anyone can do. As Emma walked away, Victoria gave Keanu a knowing look. You really don't like holding grudges, do you? She asked. Keanu chuckled. I think life's too short for that. Victoria smirked. That makes two of us. She paused, then said, I have an idea. Keanu tilted his head. I'm listening. I have a charity foundation connected to my airline, Victoria explained. It helps kids who don't have many opportunities. We offer scholarships, career advice, and training for young people who want to become pilots or flight attendants. Keanu listened closely. I think you'd be a great ambassador for it, Victoria continued. You already represent everything we teach: kindness, humility, and resilience. But most importantly, you inspire people in a way that a simple flyer never could. Keanu was quiet for a moment, thinking. He had always wanted to help others, but this was something new. It matched perfectly with his belief that small acts of kindness could create big changes. Finally, he nodded. I'd love to help. Victoria smiled, a real happy smile. Then welcome to the team. As they stepped outside the airport, Keanu took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air on his face. He had come to LAX that morning expecting a simple, quiet flight. But instead, he had faced challenges, misunderstandings, an emergency, and even a chance to help someone grow. And through it all, one thing remained true. Kindness always found its way back. As Victoria called for her car, she turned to Keanu one last time. You never did tell me, why are you going to Tokyo? Keanu grinned. Work. But hopefully a little adventure too. Victoria smirked. After today, I think you've had enough adventure for a while. Keanu laughed. You'd be surprised. Life always keeps things interesting. As they shook hands and said goodbye, Keanu felt lighter than he had in a long time. Today had been a reminder. No matter how divided people seemed, there was always room for change, growth, and unexpected connections. As he walked toward his car, he wondered, what kind of ripple effect had today's event started? The airport was still buzzing from everything that had happened that day. From the torn ticket problem to the emergency on the plane, Keanu had unknowingly become the center of a day no one would forget. But for Keanu, this wasn't about drama or attention. It was about something bigger. It was a reminder that in every moment we have a choice. A choice to be kind or unkind. A choice to judge someone or try to understand them. A choice to hold on to anger or to let it go. As Keanu got into his car, he thought about the lessons of the day. This wasn't just another flight. It was a moment that had changed people. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Victoria, you really don't stop surprising me. Let's talk more about the charity soon. Safe travels, Keanu. Keanu smiled and quickly typed back. Keanu looking forward to it. And hey, sometimes life puts us in unexpected places for a reason. He put his phone away and looked out at the city lights. That's when it truly hit him. This wasn't just about one flight. One small act of kindness could change so much more than anyone realized. Back at the airport, Emma stood in an office, nervously twisting her hands. She had expected to be fired, maybe even embarrassed in front of everyone. But instead, she had been given something she never thought she would get, a second chance. The head of HR, a serious-looking woman in her 50s, studied her carefully. Emma, I won't lie. What you did today could have cost you your job. But Ms. Hayes believes in second chances. And honestly, after what I saw from you today, I think you deserve one. Emma swallowed. What does that mean? The HR director slid a paper across the desk. It means you're being reassigned. You'll enter a special training program to learn about customer service, empathy, and respect. Our airline isn't just about luxury, it's about treating people the right way. Emma blinked. So, I'm not fired. No, the HR director said. But this is your last chance. Make the most of it. Emma let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. For years, she had thought power and control were the most important things. But today had humbled her. Now she had the chance to be better. A few weeks later, Keanu sat in a fancy glass-walled meeting room at the airline's headquarters. A small group of executives sat around him, listening to Victoria. She clicked through a presentation. This is the Aviation Kindness Initiative, she explained. It's a partnership between our airline and charities. We want to make air travel more welcoming for everyone, no matter their background. Keanu listened carefully. Too often, people are judged by their looks, money, or status, Victoria continued. What happened on that flight with Keanu showed us that these biases still exist. We want to change that. She turned to Keanu. And that's why we want you to be our first global ambassador of kindness. Keanu raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty fancy title. Victoria smirked. You earned it. An older executive with glasses added, Mr. Reeves, your actions on that flight reminded us why we got into this business in the first place. Travel isn't just about getting somewhere, it's about connecting people. Keanu nodded, thinking. He had never thought of himself as a leader in this way. But if he could help make air travel kinder and more inclusive, it was a mission worth taking. He extended his hand to Victoria. All right, I'm in. She shook his hand, smiling. Welcome to the team. A month later, Keanu was at another airport, about to board another flight. But something felt different. The staff seemed warmer. They greeted people with more kindness. There was a stronger focus on making sure everyone felt welcome. And then, at a check-in counter, Keanu saw a familiar face. Emma. She was smiling as she helped a confused traveler. She didn't rush him. She didn't roll her eyes. She listened patiently. When she looked up and saw Keanu, she gave him a small, grateful nod. Keanu nodded back. And just like that, he knew the ripple effect had begun. Keanu had never wanted power. He had never wanted attention. But today he has influenced people, not with money, not with fame, but with simple acts of kindness. And that, more than any first-class ticket, was the most valuable thing of all. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.